Hey Indian Creek 8th grade students, it's Professor Blazek and I'm here in this video to talk to you about a new grammar lesson looking at pronoun antecedent agreement. So you might be wondering, what is a pronoun and an antecedent? Well, most of you probably know that a pronoun is a word that takes the place of a noun or another pronoun. So for example, some pronouns are he, she, we, they, etc. The antecedent is the noun or the pronoun to which a pronoun is referring. So, for example, in the sentence, Michael found his phone, his is the pronoun because it's taking place of a noun, and Michael is the antecedent. It is what his refers to. Michael is the his. Because you wouldn't say Michael found Michael's phone, you use the pronoun his to take the place of that noun. Now, just as a subject and verb must always agree in number, a pronoun must always agree with its antecedent in both number and gender. So there's a second step that goes into pronoun antecedent agreement. So for example, masculine pronouns such as he or him or his are going to refer to male antecedents, whereas feminine pronouns like she or her or hers are going to refer to female antecedents. Now, there are neutral pronouns, such as it or its, that will refer to things, animals, or anything else that does not have a gender connotation. So, with pronoun antecedent agreement, you always have to keep in mind the gender of your antecedent when you're using a pronoun. So, for some example sentences, if we look at the first sentence, it says, the table had a scratch on his, her, or its surface. Obviously, the correct pronoun would be its. The table doesn't have gender. My sister always leaves his, her, or its clothes in the hallway. This pronoun would be her because sister is obviously female. Third sentence, the boys got into his, her, or their car. Now you're looking at a plural subject of boys, so now you want to use a plural pronoun, which is going to be their. In the fourth sentence, each of the girls pulled out his, her, or their phone. This is an example of a sentence where the subject is actually each, so we're looking at an individual singular pronoun to match up with our antecedent. So you would actually want to use her because obviously we're talking about whoever each of the girls is. It's still a girl, it's still female, so you would use her as the pronoun. And then finally, we have neither of the men won his, her, or their game. Again, neither is going to be our subject, but we know that no matter who the subject is, it's still going to be male because it's neither of the men. So our correct pronoun would be his. Okay, so now we'll get into some special rules with pronoun antecedent agreement. And first, I want to talk about using his or her correctly. So there are going to be some singular antecedents that could be either masculine or feminine. It's going to be unclear. And while this is very, very common in speech and also incredibly grammatically incorrect, a lot of people will treat these situations by using their when the correct pronoun to use is actually his or her. And the reason for this is that their is a plural word. So, for example, you might hear a sentence like, everybody was finishing his or her project. And in common everyday speech, a lot of people would say this as, everybody was finishing their project. But because the subject is everybody, everybody meaning every single person, making it a singular subject, that means that using their as a pronoun would be incorrect, and you want to instead use his or her. Okay, so you see our subject again is everybody, and the correct pronoun to use would be his or her. Because you're using it for a subject that is singular and a person, but does not have a obvious or clear gender, you always want to use his or her. So another example sentence would be to say, did someone in this class forget his or her homework? Again, in speech, you would hear a lot of people say, did someone in this class forget their homework? But because our subject is someone, that means one individual person. So one individual person could not possibly have the homework of multiple people, which is what your sentence would be suggesting if you were to use their. So again, you would want to, in order to connect the singular subject with a singular pronoun, a singular antecedent, you would say, did someone in this class forget his or her homework? So now I want to talk about sentences that have multiple antecedents and how to choose the correct pronoun depending on the situation. And you'll notice as we go through that the rules are almost exactly the same as when we had talked about subject-verb agreement and what to do when you had a compound subject. So when you have two or more antecedents that are joined by or nor, you use the same form as the antecedent that is closest to the pronoun. So this is exactly the same as subject-verb agreement when you had a singular subject and a plural subject combined by or nor versus two singular subjects versus two plural subjects. There are different rules depending on the situation. So I have 4 example sentences to take you through the different situations you might come by, and we'll look at each one right now. So if you were to say John or Jim will bring his basketball, John or Jim are both singular subjects, so you would use a singular pronoun to refer to them, whichever one it is, so you would therefore use his. In the second sentence, we have the Bulldogs or the Spartans lost their game. So now we have 2 antecedents, both of which are plural, so no matter which one it is, you still want to use a plural pronoun, which would be their. Now in these last 2 sentences, you'll see that they're very similar, but the order affects which pronoun you choose. So in the third sentence, we have my aunt or my parents lost their keys. Now the 2 antecedents in this sentence are my aunt and my parents, and because parents, the plural antecedent, is closer to the pronoun, you would use a plural pronoun, which is their. On the other hand, if you were to say my parents or my aunt lost her keys, now that the singular antecedent of aunt is closer to the pronoun, you would use a singular pronoun, which would be her. So again, very similar to subject-verb agreement. When you have 2 or more antecedents joined by or nor, you just always use the same form, whether it's singular or plural, as the one that is closest to the pronoun. Now, on the other hand, if you have 2 or more antecedents that are joined by and, you would almost always use a plural pronoun. So in this example, my aunt and uncle painted their house. Okay, so that one's pretty straightforward. Shouldn't be too many worries there. So now let's talk about indefinite pronouns again. And just as a reminder, pronouns that don't refer to a specific thing, place, or person are called indefinite pronouns. We've seen some examples already in this video. And when an indefinite pronoun is the antecedent in a sentence, the pronoun has to match it in number, just like the verb matching an indefinite pronoun when it's being used as the subject of a sentence. So again, here's our chart of indefinite pronouns. You can see there are some that are singular, some that are plural, and some that are both, and then you have to just look at the situation and decide which form is being used. So for example, if you were to say everyone has a computer at his or her house, you can see everyone is a singular indefinite pronoun, so therefore you would use his or her. In the next sentence, when it says each of the cherries has a pit in its center, again, each is a singular indefinite pronoun being used as the antecedent, so you would use another singular pronoun, which would be its. Now, if you were to say several of the students had finished their extra credit, you can see several is a plural pronoun, therefore you need another plural pronoun, which would be their. And in the last 2, we'll show the difference between the indefinite pronouns that can be both, and you just need to look at the situation to decide which form is being used. So if you were to say all of the pasta sat in its dish, okay, all is one of those indefinite pronouns that can be either singular or plural, but because it's referring to pasta, which is a singular noun, you would therefore use a singular pronoun to refer to it, which would be its. On the other hand, if you were to say all of the potatoes, now all is referring to potatoes, which is a plural noun, so you would therefore use a plural pronoun, which would be their. So just a little trick, when you see indefinite pronouns like all or any or some, you have to look at exactly what that pronoun is referring to. Is it singular? Is it plural? And then decide on your correct pronoun. Just as a reminder, again, you can also use collective nouns as antecedents, and a collective noun is a noun that names a group, such as audience or team, collection, etc. And a collective noun that is used as an antecedent is singular if it refers to the group as a whole, and plural if it refers to individual parts of the group, just like we talked about when collective nouns are being used as the subject of sentences. So if you were to say the team will play its game on Friday, team is our collective noun. It is being used to refer to the group as a whole, so you would use the singular pronoun of its. On the other hand, if you were to say the team gathered their equipment before the game, now it's each individual players gathering their own equipment, so you would use their, because it's being used as plural. There are multiple players gathering equipment. If you were to say the audience roared its approval, that is describing the audience as reacting as one group, so you would use the pronoun of its. On the other hand, if you were to say the audience clapped their hands, obviously the audience members all have their own hands, so they're acting as a plurality, so you would use the pronoun of their in this example. So just again, when you see a collective noun, you have to look at, are they talking about the group as a whole? Are they talking about the individual members of that group? And then decide if you're using a singular or plural pronoun. Now there are some nouns that are plural in form that are going to take singular pronouns. So such as electronics, mathematics, news, etc. We had the same rule with subjects and verbs. So if you were to say gymnastics is challenging, but it is an enjoyable sport. Gymnastics looks plural. It's plural in form, but it's only one sport, so you would use a singular pronoun to refer to it. If you were to say the news was confusing tonight, wasn't it? Again, news looks plural, but is actually singular, so you would use the singular pronoun of it. So now we have some practice sentences for you to go through. If you'd like to pause the video and go ahead and make your selections, I will give you time to do so right now. Then go ahead and restart it when you're ready to get the answers. Okay, so if we look at our practice sentences, number one, I hope somebody will raise his or her or their hand to ask a question. The antecedent is somebody, which is referring to just one person. So because we don't know the gender, you would use the singular pronoun of his or her. In number two, one of the dogs had a name tag on its or their collar. The subject of this sentence would be one, because it's only one dog that has a name tag, so you would use the singular pronoun of its. Number three, we have penguins often get around by sliding on its or their bellies. In this sentence, the antecedent is penguins, which would be plural, so therefore you need to use a plural pronoun, which would be their. Number four, we have the class had chosen its or their dance theme. Now, this is one of those collective nouns being used as an antecedent, which is class. And because the class in this situation is acting as one group, you would use the singular pronoun of its, because they're all acting as one. Number five, each student will choose the subject for his or her or their final project. The antecedent here is each student, so each individual student. So the pronoun that would be correct to use in this situation would be his or her. And then finally, number six, neither Matt nor Jim had a credit card in his or their wallet. This is one of those where we have multiple antecedents, Matt and Jim. They're joined by or nor, but because they're both singular, you would always use the singular pronoun of his. So neither one of them had a credit card in his wallet. So I hope this video has been very helpful in helping you understand pronoun antecedent agreement. It's very similar to subject-verb agreement, just always keeping in mind the number and gender of your antecedent. And so I hope in the future that you will find this a very easy grammatical task. And until next time, this has been Professor Blazek signing off.